Just does this workshop, if we look at revoking this policy, does this workshop constitute a review by legislative requirement?
We're not revoking it. We're actually rolling it over.
So we're not having any discussion on it?
No.
That is an option,
had a lot of discussion on it.
Look,
that is an option.
Are you wanting to revoke it?
No, I'm happy to have a bit of a discussion though, because I do note, I mean, I'm just all for why overcomplicate things. The legislation prescribes what can and can't be done. I look at what Hamilton City Council have done. They haven't got a bylaw. They allow the legislative framework to kick in. Do we want to actually overcomplicate this and have our own bylaw?
Well, my understanding last time was we need to actually have this to actually facilitate the legislation to take act. If my understanding is correct. So if you don't have it, it means there isn't. Melissa's got her hands up. All I know is this works. Yeah. Don't muck around with something that works. Melissa.
So I'd just like to, a couple of things I'll point out there. The policy does allow for shops to open throughout the entire district. If council doesn't adopt a policy, we revert back to the Act, which is quite restrictive in terms of which shops can and cannot open. So just to cover off specifically, they are shops like garden centres, restaurants, dairies and pharmacies. I imagine that they'll be sort of the scope of what types of shops would actually open in the Waikato district. But yes, if council doesn't have a policy, then none of the retail shops can open.
Yeah.
And just in terms of the review, regardless of whether or not council decides to roll the policy over or revoke it or whatever, we do have to go through a consultation process.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
okay, Councillor Beck.
Yeah, I was just going to speak in support of actually continuing this policy as it is. I'm very pleased to report that I wasn't struck by lightning in spite of some of the views expressed by the community for allowing shops to choose themselves last time. We had a very thorough review and I'm not aware, and perhaps staff can assist, but I'm not aware of any issues or problems with the policy or any complaints that have flooded in the 3 years since last. So in the absence of that, I would suggest that we continue. And in closing, I would say that with this post-COVID times, it's been a very, very difficult time for our retailers and our shops and business community generally. And I don't think we should be imposing additional restrictions on them over and above what's proven to work in regards to this thing. It's only a day a year or a small number of impositions. But I don't think we should be putting any additional obstacles in the way when there are no problems here. Policy's working.
Yep. All right, Councillor Eyre, do you want to talk again?
Yeah, thanks. I actually don't have an opinion. Obviously, I wasn't privy to any discussions in the last triennium to this policy, but I guess I do see benefit in having a more of a position aligned with our neighbouring councils. I mean, a lot of people don't actually know where the border between Waikato District and Hamilton and Auckland is. If they're travelling through on that day, they don't see any consistency about what's open and what isn't. And like, as I say, I do note that Hamilton City Council, and correct me if I'm wrong, Melissa, Hamilton City Council rely on the legislative framework. They don't have any additional opening hours with their shop. So that would probably be my only concern, is how we inform people that we have a different view to our neighbours.
So if you take your analogy, Councillor, you'd be back to only limited shops as Hamilton's got under the legislation. This, yes, we are the gatekeepers to this, not the legislation. So I think you're hanging your hat on the legislation. The legislation prohibits shops from opening except for essential shops, which are named. Okay, correct. We're allowing all shops to be open, and I think I totally agree with Councillor Beck's view. In this times, and certainly struggling times, I don't think it is up to us to tell what shops want to be open. But in saying that, the majority of our shops, other than probably some in Raglan, don't open anyway. But that's their choice, not our control. And that's the way we looked at it last time. It's up to them to make that decision, not up to us to enforce it on them based on what we believe in.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. That's all. I was just saying for consistency of neighbours. That's all. So
I would say Hamilton have got it wrong for the simple fact is they restrict their retailers. We don't. That's how I feel about it. Councillor Church.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, we did. Council did do a lot of work at our last review time, and I agree with Councillor Beck. Where my understanding, and these staff can tell us otherwise, there hasn't been much issues with that decision. And I also note that like places like in the Waikato District Council, like Pocono and Raglan particularly, and some of our other towns, it can become just destinations over that holiday period. And so there's a reliability on economic development. Looking forward that we're going to be able to move around freely. So, in terms of our economies and our towns, and with no issues, I'm more in favour of not spending too much time and rolling it over. I reviewed it and I can't see anything wrong with it at the moment.
So, Councillor Wellington.
Yeah, from a Christian point of view, I would support having everything closed, but the practicality is our world is very secular, and so I'm not going to I'll just support it. I'm not going to stand against it because I can see that the consensus is to support it, and so I'll just go along with that thinking.
All right, look, if there's no more speakers, I think, Melissa, we probably, as you said, we need to consult with it. So
I'm Maxine here. I've got a view.
Oh, Maxine, I didn't see you hiding in the corner.
Yeah,
yes,
sorry,
Maxine.
I was just a little bit late. So just with regard, we're talking about Easter trading, eh? So with regard to Easter trading, my preference, so I have a Christian point of view also, and I just feel that entities such as the council, we also become gatekeepers of the sort of moral standing for our community as well. So I'm in favour of things being closed. I prefer to follow what, and I know I'm not on council, but I was invited to the workshop, so I've come along. So my view is I would support what Hamilton City Council does and keep things closed.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, I'll go back to what I was saying before. So Melissa, we need to go out and consult on this. So,
Yes.
So I think you get a pretty clear steer from council to go out and consult on a status quo position.
Okay, so I will just confirm because we have to go through policy and regulatory committee, so I'll bring a paper to the November meeting just to confirm that we can go out for consultation.
Cool, rightio. That didn't take long, 10 minutes. Well done, people. Rightio, the next one. Hang on, I just have to change agendas. Right, gambling venues. Melissa, any comments?
I think we've got Tony Pike and Anthea on to take us through the PowerPoint presentation.
Where's Tony?
Good morning, councillors.
I was trying to find you. Couldn't find you. Yeah, where you go.
Oh, good morning, council. I'm just going to share
in here. Now, hopefully we've got
my screen. Yeah, Tony, can you see that?
Yes, all good, Anthea.
Great. So I'll just kick off the gambling venues policy with a couple of introduction slides before I hand over to Tony. So the purpose of the workshop is really to focus on the review of the policy. Staff are seeking feedback on any changes that elected members may want to the current policy, and that's just considering the scope of the policies set out in the Gambling Act. So there are some parameters around that, including if new venues may be established, if existing venues may be relocated or merged, where venues may be relocated, the conditions that may be applied, how many machines venues may have, and what the primary role of the venue must be. So taking that into consideration, the agenda for this part of the workshop will focus on the national level context and the situation in the Waikato district, which Tony will go through. And then I'll just run you through what the current policy says and the options for the policy review. So Tony, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Anthea. Look, and I have to apologise, councillors. Anthea and myself had a bit of a song and dance routine organised for this to celebrate us being together, but obviously COVID hasn't allowed that. So because I know some people are very familiar with this information, others perhaps not so much, but I have updated some stats just to give you a feel for the national context and why councils are involved in this particular area. So I guess just to set the scene and introduce that first slide, I guess just to say, look, gambling is one of those issues 12 months, whether it's on a lottery ticket or gone to the races or whatever. So it's an established form of entertainment in New Zealand. Unfortunately, with gambling machines, there is a darker side, and that is that there is a small percentage of the population that do suffer or have problems with gambling, and that impacts wider family and community. So the darker side. So I guess what we're talking about today is that balance that councils have a role to play in saying, okay, we facilitate gambling because most of the population, over 98%, are absolutely fine with gambling, but being aware that it does affect a small percentage. And look, I just wanted to, in that first slide that you can see before you, just sort of explain the context in terms of there are three groups of health have a responsibility for taking an integrated approach to problem gambling. So, for example, I've just attended a meeting where they are proposing spending $67 million over the next 3 years on problem gambling, about $10 million a year on clinical activities and support for problem gamblers, of which there is about 800 self-identified per year. So that's the ministry's role. There's a Department of Internal Affairs. They address problem gambling through regulation. They monitor all gambling machines in New Zealand. So just to sort of put that into context, and then there's ourselves and council, and I'll explain a little bit further on our particular role there, our responsibilities, if you like. But just to continue to paint that picture, there's about $800 million in expenditure, and I call that's losses. So it's not what goes into other areas of gambling. It's just what people put in the slot machine. We're talking about class 4 gambling machines here. Put in the slot machine and they lose it. So there's $800 million a year. That was in 2019. It's gone up a little bit in 2020 by about 3.5%. In the Waikato here in that 2019, there was $9.8 million spent on. In that same period, there were 35 people that were identified as asking for help as problem gamblers. That figure will change. In 2018, it was about 113 people in 2018. It previously had been up to about, seemed to hover about that 35, 70 people. Problem gambling, about 0.3 to 0.5 of that population are seen as having a problem gambling. So that's, I guess, just to set the bigger scene. I just wanted the next slide just to sort of share with you what where that money goes in terms of spending. In a nutshell, it says that 37% of gambling expenditure, so when you've taken away prize money that's gone back, is associated with class 4 gambling machines. Casinos, about 24%, and I have to say casinos have about just a bit over 3,000 gaming machines or poker machines in their establishments. That's not covered by this 14%, and then there's lotteries in that 25%. So 37% is class 4 gambling machines. On the right-hand side, you'll see that diagram is really just saying, while game machines make up 37% of the losses, they do account for a higher percentage or associated with a higher percentage of problem gamblers. And look, there's lots of research that says that talks about that. I won't go. Environment is part of accessibility. It's part of, I guess, easier to go down and play a poker machine on your own. Whereas if you go to the races, you've probably got a group of people or family that might say, "Hey, listen, you've spent enough." So it does account for a greater percent of the problem gambling. Just on this go for your information, and that's part of the expenditure going back to the local community there. Anthea, could you just move on to the next slide, please? Cracker, thank you. So of the proceeds, the gross proceeds, you'll see the breakdown there. Some goes to the government in terms of duty. There's a 1.5% levy that goes to the Ministry of Health or to problem gambling, I should say, where the Ministry of Health take their funding from. And then where gambling machines are associated with trusts, so if they're in a pub, for example, there'd be a trust running that. There's about 13 trusts in the Waikato area, such as the Lion Foundation. They put back into the community about 40% of the money that's lost. If the proceeds would go back to members of the club or to the club for the benefit of members. But most of the gambling machines in the community, the proceeds, or 40% is dictated, will go back to the community, and that's quite a regulated process. So in 2019, there's about $241 million that went to the nation, or back into the national communities, if you like. In the Waikato in that same year, 1.1 million to organisations that were national, or to organisations that crossed various, more than one council's boundary. So the 1.1 is just what we know landed in the Waikato area. That varies a bit. Waipa, who have a similar number of machines to us and a similar expenditure, have a higher contribution to the community. I don't know exactly what, but I guess it's the structure of organisations and the people that make applications. There probably is, from my reading, it seems that there is quite a bit more that goes back to the larger, to cities, if you like, because of a national basis and sports and such like. But anyway, 1.1 goes to fund local communities from the gambling there. Anthea, if you could just move on to the next slide for me, please. I just want to give people, you've seen this slide before. I just want to update it a little bit. In gambling machines, that's that spike there. That trend has come down. It's tracking at about reducing the number of gambling machines in the communities nationally by about 470 per year. So in 2020, we've got just under 15,000 gambling machines in New Zealand. And I guess it's interesting to reflect that while the gambling machines have reduced that rate, about 8,000 in the last 17 years, a reduction of 8,000. They think, from my readings, that seems to be that we probably have a smaller group of gamblers that are spending more. And I'll talk about that when I talk about problem gamblers going forward. So just to look at that problem gambling area, Anthea, could you just move on to that next slide, please, for me? So I won't read all those, I'll just talk you through. Obviously, problem gambling has a number of effects on the community. Financial, parenting, domestic violence has been associated with problem gambling. So it is quite a perverse and invasive type of challenge. It particularly it's particularly prevalent, or not prevalent, but it is those living in high deprivation areas are more likely to be problem gamblers. And we have about 10 of our venues that are in a high deprivation areas, or the highest deprivation areas in the Waikato. Of particular note is that Maori and Pacific peoples are more likely to be affected by problem gambling, and particularly Maori and Pacific women. I would add to that, actually, the Ministry of Health is now saying that the Asian community is also featuring, not because of the number, but because individuals, or some individuals in the Asian community, will tend to spend a lot of money on gambling. So those three groups, Maori, Pacific people, and Asian community, will be a focus of the Ministry of Health's problem gambling activities over the next 3 years. So just to talk on the next slide about where people can get help with gambling, how that sort of works. So look, there's a range of measures. The regulations talk about the response people that have got issues with gambling to have to interact with them, and they train staff to be able to spot and identify people with gambling problems. Sometimes gamblers are excluded from venues. I'm not sure, there's no real evidence so that I can see that says that works particularly well, but anyway, they can be excluded. And there is a responsibilities on the staff about educating, talking to folk with problem gambling. There is a lot of problem gambling services. As I said, there's about just over $20 million will be spent each of the next 3 years on problem gambling. So that's funding counsellors, clinical services, and also educate and help spread the word of support for problem gamblers. So, Salvation Army feature in that, for example. So the challenges going forward, Anthony, if we could just move to the next slide, please. So as I've said, the challenge is the balance between it being a legal activity and entertainment and the problem gambler. Pacific peoples, particularly women, in the high deprivation areas. There are responsibilities for gambling control, which I just talked about, which balances that. And I guess the other fact would be that most proceeds go back to the community. And I believe in our last community consultation, there was a lot of feedback from groups that received funding from the community. So the challenge, I guess, for policymakers is to consider what level of risk is acceptable or currently acceptable in the community, and that's one of the things for you as council that we have in place. So what's that balance, I guess? So I just wanted to move on the next slide, just to kind of just very briefly just remind us all why we're involved with this. So the Gambling Act enables councils to control the growth of Class 4 gambling, so we can make a decision about, as you'll see in the policy, if there's a merger, and also in terms of how that impacts on community involvement around the decisions that are going to be made. So in other words, going to public consultation if we see the need. Then there's the Racing Act. We don't actually have, no, sorry, I should rephrase that. So the Racing Act talks about facilitating betting in other sports. So there are those aspects of legislation that says that a territorial local authority, a council, can make certain conditions around how those activities operate in our area. So just on the next slide, I just wanted to very quickly just remind you about the number of venues we have in the Waikato. So there's 18 venues with 233 Class 4 gambling machines. That pretty much, that hasn't changed since our last review 3 years ago. As I say, 10 of those venues are in high deprivation areas. And in the 2019 $9.8 million was spent or lost, I should TAB venues in the district. Just on the next slide, really it just, I want in the next slide just to sort of, you'll see that while we do have, there can be more gambling machines in the Waikato, we currently only have the 233. So there'll be various operators that are licensed to have a few more machines. And I think at this stage, probably, I know last time we had some questions around, well, how do you what the licensing numbers? So basically, if there's on the 17th of October 2001, premises could be licensed up or apply for and be licensed by the Department of Interior. After the October 2001, they could be licensed for up to 9. So you'll see on the list that's on the next slide, you'll see that some premises have 18 and some have a lot less. And that's not only to do with the number that they want to operate, but it'll have it'll stem from their licensing when they apply. When they're applied and how many they were allowed. Around the what's happening nationally and what's happening locally, I wonder if now might be a good time, I think, just to pass over to you, Anthea, to look at the policy background and the other aspects of the actual policy.
Thanks, Tony. So the current policy contains two policies. So the Class 4 venues policy, which is the pokies, and the TAB board venues policy for race and sports betting. The current policy was adopted 3 years ago, October 2018, and the legislation says that policy must be reviewed every 3 years. So we will be a little bit overdue with our review, but the current policy doesn't cease to have an effect despite it being overdue. So as Tony alluded to earlier, Section 101 of the Gambling Act requires TAs to adopt a policy on Class 4 venues. And I did mention this earlier about what the council's role is, so I won't go through that, but it's basically looking at new venues and when they can relocate or merge, and conditions to do with those types of things. Section 96 of the Racing Industry Act requires councils to have a policy on where race and sports betting may be conducted. This is a new act, so during the last review it was under the Racing Act 2003, but I think basically the conditions that apply to councils are basically the same. Councils must have regard to the social impact of gambling when they develop these policies, so that's a point I'll come back to in a couple of slides. So a basic overview of the current policy. It's a sinking lid policy, which means that we're aiming to reduce the number of gaming machines over time. So that means that the policy doesn't allow any new Class 4 venues. As Tony said, there's a maximum of 9 machines at any venue. Relocation is supported under circumstances like a newly constructed building or a refurbishment, but they must be located in an area with a deprivation index that is the same or better. There's to be no increase in the number of gaming machines with relocation. Merging clubs must stay within the same community of interest. For mergers and relocations, council can approve more than 9 gaming machines, but they must have consideration of criteria such as district characteristics, the location, and any cumulative effects on gambling. And merged venues, the maximum number of machines is 5/6 of the total number of machines to a maximum of 18. And the policy does allow TAB venues to be established, even though we do not have any at the moment. So I thought it would be useful to have a look at other councils' policies. And just before I go through this, I'll just note that I've added some extra info in on Auckland Council on the next slide. And there's an updated memo in your Dropbox that has the inclusion of Auckland Council's policy in it. But just looking at these Waikato TA policies, they are quite similar. The majority have a sinking lid policy with restrictions on mergers and relocations. Waipa doesn't have a sinking lid policy, but there are restrictions on the number of gaming machines, and there's discretion around mergers and relocations. I'll just point out Otorohanga District Council, that's quite an interesting one. They reviewed their policy earlier this year and they were proposing to remove that sinking lid and replace it with a case-by-case look at whether new Class 4 gaming venues could be established. This was done because they thought it might be of economic benefit, but by and large, the submissions that came in during their consultation process were against this proposal, so they kept their sinking lid policy. And just looking at Auckland's policy, they have retained the same policy since 2013. It's a sinking lid policy. Gaming venues cannot increase the number of machines, no relocations. Venues can merge with their clubs, but there must be a fewer number of gaming machines when looking at the combined sum of the two venues' existing number. And Tier B venues are capped at 43. They may relocate, but if an existing venue closes, a new Tier B cannot take its place. So considering social impacts, Council contracted Becca to do a social impact report earlier this year, considering that this review is coming up. There are a number of recommendations made, which are outlined here. The first recommendation is that Council identifies a strategic long-term direction for the use of gaming machines in the district. They felt this would be useful because the current policies objectives are straight out of the Gambling Act, so they're quite generic. And they thought if we had a strategic direction, then perhaps the objectives could be a bit more tailored to what the community wants. They recommended that a further social impact report is completed, and that would involve more stakeholder engagement to understand the costs and benefits of gaming in the district. A review of Otorohanga's gambling policy submission, so that is taking into consideration what I mentioned before about their policy review earlier this year, and also a literature review to just enable a broader range of research into the topic. And finally, they recommended that Council works closely with harm intervention services within the district to enable better decision making and understanding of community issues. So that would be with groups like the D.B. Bryant Trust and Anglican Action. So we've got three options for you to consider today when looking at reviewing the gambling policy. The first option is to just retain the status quo, the existing policy, the sinking lid. Option two is to provide feedback on the policy. So if there are any changes that councillors may want to let us know about that, and we can take those into consideration. And the final option is to implement the social impact report recommendations when reviewing the policy. In your memo, you would have noted that this is not recommended due to the amount of time that would take and the constraints on staff to do this, but work could be reprioritised if this was your preferred option, or we could look at outsourcing that work. And finally, just looking at next steps, if there are changes that council would like to propose, then we could schedule a second workshop if required. And also just noting that if there are any proposed changes to the policy, then a special consultative procedure would need to take place. And this would occur in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. You want to give me the screen back, please? Rightio, everyone back? Okay, I'm just going to just want to clear something here in relation to Councillor McAnally's participation at this. Frank, I'm going to ask you to actually, you can stay, but I'd ask you not to comment, please, because of your role with the Huntly RSA. And that is to protect yourself, but also to protect council in its process. So you're president of the club, and I'm looking at a list with your organisation on it. So I'd ask you from refraining from comment.
Yes, fair enough.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask a question after that? Just a question?
Not about any of this, no. I'd rather you just button out of it.
Just about our policy, that was all.
No, I'd rather you just not say anything, Frank. It's just real awkward. You're a president of a club that's named on.
Yeah, I hold the gaming licence here. Yeah.
Okay, so just put your thing on mute and sit back and watch it.
Bugger.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Ellen. I think like the Easter trading policy that we've just done is in some ways don't fix what's not broken. We spent a lot of time on this last time around in 2018. And so my view is to option one, the status quo. With why that is because some of the recommendations, one of them being, which was just up on the board, was council identifies a strategic long-term direction for use of class 4 machines, which is what we done last time. That's what a sinking lid policy is. So, you know, we have, as I said, we've put in a lot into that. Also, there's since 2018 and probably before that as well, but since 2018, there's been huge improvements with identifying and assisting problem gamblers, and a lot of work being put into that. And that number is sort of getting less. So, you know, also I commend everybody for staff for putting out this report and this pre-reading because it was very helpful. And the other thing is if we keep reducing it with the sinking lid policy, that's something that would probably maybe keep the numbers of the machines the same for quite some time. And but as operations close, etc., you know, they will reduce. But if we just keep forcing that reducing and reducing, all it does, as it says in this report, it just moves people onto online gambling. With online gambling, we just lose control and people actually can hide behind things and they're hard to identify. So you're actually making the problem worse than having them in a physical site. And also with that and moving people into online gambling, you take away that ability to be able to fund, you know, your organisations that you're involved with, as in funding. And, you know, for the last 25 years, I've been involved, of a lifetime in sport, but the last 25 years been involved with funding applications for different sporting groups and organisations. And I see some good benefits that come from that. And so moving it off to, you know, shutting it down further or trying to restrict more and more, which I think we did pretty well last time to restrict those numbers down. If we keep doing that, you're just going to move it into online gambling, as I said, and we lose control. Everybody loses control, and you'd probably find there could be more harm in society with people with problems. So that's just my comments. Thank you. So leave it as is. That's my view.
Good comments. Thank you. Councillor Gibb.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. I support leaving it as is, and for the same reasons that Councillor Patterson just outlined. I also see that with the growth in population, the percentage per person of gambling machines out there is going to come down just slowly with the sinking lid anyway, as a percentage of population of the growth. Just a question, Melissa, or Tony, I think it would be of. So it says if we leave it the same, we don't have to consult. I just want to understand that a bit further. Thank you.
Stop.
Melissa, do you want to?
Tony,
pick it up?
You've got bad net, mate. You're really hard to understand.
You might have to ring that Vodafone guy.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I wonder if Melissa or Anthony might pick that up.
I just wonder whether Anthony or somebody else could actually answer, or somebody other than you, because it's hard to listen to you.
Sorry about that.
I can respond to that. So if council doesn't propose, or if they don't want any further changes to the policy, we don't have to go through a special consultative process, only if changes are made.
Look, once again, I went through this the other day and again this morning, and Councillor Smith, just so you've got his view, he couldn't be here, but he actually gave me a view on both of them, and he felt that this is one he does have a little bit of involvement with through his alcohol licensing process, because they actually have to assess the income that's derived on a licensed premises, whether it be where it's made up from food, alcohol, selling cigarettes, or gaming machines. And he was very much of the view, and I think it's already the previous two speakers, and I'll include myself in that, is a status quo. Once again, as Councillor Patterson said, we did a heck of a lot of work around this last time to try and get a balance, and I think we have got a balance in keeping it right. A lot of us don't like these machines, and myself included, but there's an up and a down to this as well. And as long as you understand what the down is and actually have a safety net or provisions in place to deal with the downside of it, you basically and apply the sinking lid policy, I think it will come down over time, given time. But yeah, so I sit with the status quo approach as well. Councillor Beck.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'm of a similar mind. If pushed to say in which direction would I move, then it would be to further restrict rather than to further liberalise. But I guess I'm happy that we did the work last time and we're in that direction of travel, albeit slowly. Look, I think all of us, in our other lives, be it as part of sports groups or schools or whatever, have probably all benefited from gaming trust money for projects that we've done at the local level. So I understand the value of that money going back in. But look, I have to say, notwithstanding that, I'm just extremely uncomfortable seeing how the machines that we do have in the district tend to be in those high deprivation areas, the communities that can least afford that money going out. And I'm pretty sure that, and I guess I'm generalising because we don't have the data in front of us, but the whānau that sits, whānau member that sits in front of the pokie machine is not necessarily the one whose kid is benefiting from an improved sports ground or whatever. There's probably a bit of a disconnect. So, the poorest, least able to afford it, members of our community are in fact funding activities that probably should get their funds from elsewhere. But look, that's the system we got. I support the direction of travel that the sinking lid gives us, and I acknowledge Councillor Patterson's point. We didn't talk about it this time, but staff went to some length last time to inform us about the online gambling that is easily accessible through the internet now and is completely uncontrolled, if based on an offshore platform. We don't want to drive people there either. So my support for the first option of status quo.
Thanks. Councillor Maguire.
Yeah, I support the status quo. I'm never happy about these things, but I support it. And I think we've done a good job last time and really went well, delved into it quite deeply. So I'm quite comfortable with it carrying on as it is.
Thank you. Look, I think for me, this is like dancing on barbed wire. You get pricked no matter which way you jump here. But at the end of the day, I think the work we did last time, and we did a heck of a lot of work around understanding the downside of these machines and also the upside of it. And I think we were all of the mind of less is best, but what's there at the moment is not greater. And I think if we can maintain a downward trend over time, perhaps, whether that happens or not, I don't know, but I'll just go to Councillor Gibbs' point. As our population grows, those figures will change too, around the percentage per machine. But at the end of the day, that's probably not the best way to look at it either in relation to is it better. But it is what it is, and it does fill a gap within our communities. And I know those that were around last time when we dealt with this, of course, all the philanthropic organisations came in to tell us how important it was to our clubs, social organisations and welfare and everything else. But that's where the money goes back into the community. So I think that's probably where we did get that balance, I think, and probably I don't see any point in actually tilting that balance in any which way at the moment. It's Maxine, sorry. Turn your microphone on, Maxine.
Thank you. I would support also the status quo. It's quite a tricky thing, really. I support what Axel said. I'd rather see less, but I also agree that it would just push people into doing more online gambling. The report, which I thought was a really good report and a really good presentation, thank you very much. So the group most affected is Māori women. Yep, that's me. But the group that's really affected are probably the children that live in those homes. So
I hate to interrupt you. Can I get you to take over for a minute, Axel, please?
Yeah. the children that live in those homes. So anything that would reduce the opportunities to gamble, I'd be quite supportive of this. And I just go back to a comment I made earlier when we were talking about the Sunday trading policy too. I think in this way, council has an opportunity to influence the moral fibre of the community that we live in by making it easier for people to gamble. We tend to encourage or skew the community that way for those who want to participate in it, and often it's the section of the community which is often Māori and Pacifica. But we saw in the report that Pacific and Asian is what 5-6% of our community, whereas Māori is what 25%. Yet the group that's most affected are Māori and Pacific women. So I support the status quo. Thank you.
Maxine, Carolyn.
Thanks, Axel. I don't know if everybody else's internet is horrendous this morning or if it's just mine, so apologies if I freeze. Look, I agree with everybody's comments as much as I don't like them. Without a doubt, I see there is a place for them, and it's better to actually manage rather than having it being driven into underground. But I don't doubt that there's been good work done in the past around this policy, 2018, I think somebody mentioned. Where am I able to, obviously not being part of those discussions, where am I able to access some of the information that you've used to inform in the creation of that policy?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question, because some of the councillors here who were there are relying, I guess, on information gained at that time. Melissa, are we able to share in the Dropbox some of the staff reports as well as the submissions made to the last consultative round, some of which will still be, quite relevant, I'm sure?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I'll dig up some of the information from the last round and flick it out to you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you. Jackie?
Yeah, thanks, Axel. Yeah, I think we're on the right track. We're obviously going to go out, but I think we've done quite a lot of work on it. I guess my main comments would be just around the data itself, because it's actually based on 2018, and I wondered whether, because we're getting other reports through with more up-to-date stats around 2020, if this is actually the most up-to-date stats. Number one. Number two, like on page 10 of our data, which shows a map of deprivation, that's actually in contradiction to page 25 of the information that we got, the review pre-reading. So as an example, like for Tuaka being one, not as a high level deprivation area, but then on page 25 it's saying it's a 10 out of 10 deprivation area. So some of the data is not in sync with it itself and contrary. Also, just on those same lines, as if we're going to be going out and just really understanding this whole format further, the stakeholder groups, we've got out to the Waikato DHB, for example, and although we've got the high order for Waikato Tainui, which is all the rohe of Waikato Tainui, but I do wonder with the Salvation Army, the DHB, and anyone else in the North Waikato who are the stakeholders that are being planned to be engaged with, because I don't see any of those facilities up the north being discussed for this pre-reading or for the future at all. So I'd be interested in what that list is, and also what that feedback might be from that point of view, because we've got a lot of ethnicities and a lot of issues in this North Waikato as well. So really, it's about the robustness and our understanding as a whole council of the whole of our district would be helpful to me. Happy to take that offline further if you've got any more information about those stakeholder engagement, either previously to pull this report together, or where do you intend to go and who you tend to go to in the future. Thank you.
Right, so you're happy to take that offline and get that feedback separately? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. I'll come to you then, Chris.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, just reading on the first page of it says most proceeds from gambling are returned to gamblers in the form of wins and to a lesser degree community organisations, form of grants and gaming trusts. There's no mention of the organisations that actually hold these the gambling that actually hold the machines. That should be mentioned in there as well, to say, well, they are a beneficiary of it, because they're making money out of themselves by holding it. They're taking a cut. So that's saying that the gamblers are actually getting the money, but they're reinvesting it so they don't get it. So I'd like to see that statement tidied up. I think it's a misnomer. I'm obviously against, well, it's not obvious, but I'm against gambling machines. But it's a fact of life. It's part of society, and we're better to be aware of it and help and control it than to have it just out and gambling there. We got no idea what's going on. So from that point of view, I'd like to see the sinking lid encouraged and maybe even magnified, and certainly status quo would be the very worst. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wilson, and perhaps staff can take on board just that wording that Councillor Wilson referred to. It is quite clear from that one of the early slides in Tony's presentation, that cut, if you like, the commission that the establishment receives is quite clearly declared, and in fact it's set by statute. So there's no secret about it, and from time to time we are aware in the newspaper of organisations that try to improve their cut by funneling it back through some other means, which the regulator takes a very dim view of, and will try and enforce appropriate behaviour. There's DIA, I think, isn't it, Tony, that does that, and they are certainly on the lookout for that. But yeah, points noted. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Lisa, can I come to you?
Thank you, Councillor Beck. I just really want to acknowledge what everyone has contributed to the discussion this morning. It is a hard space. When some of us are impacted personally, I have a whānau member who got into a really big hole, and they almost lost their farm, from a really bad gambling addiction. But that person was well supported. But said to me one day, when we were actually at the Harbourview Hotel in Raglan, and when we walked past those machines, said to me in my ear, they whispered to me when I walked past, like the machines talk to her, encouraging her. And so it's a really, really sad space for people, to be in. But I accept, that we did a lot of work in 2018. And after listening to everyone's corridor, I think I support option 1.
Right, sorry everybody, I'm back again.
No, that's fine, Marilyn. There was a number of good conversations, but general support continues around that option 1 of status quo.
All right, so has anybody else got a contrary view to status quo? If there's not, from a staff perspective, where to from here? We don't require to consult, or what? Melissa, anybody?
I'll let you answer this one.
If there's no changes, then no, we do not need to consult.
Well, I know I've only missed a couple of speakers, but I think before I left there was a fairly strong consensus to a status quo. And I think that's based off the hard work we did last time. So I'd suggest we just roll. Unless anybody's got a contribution, we just roll it.
The great news is, Your Worship, you can re-watch it on the Council's YouTube channel, and everything you missed is there for you forever. No. I'm sorry about that. I had to take a call from DPMC. We've got a pretty contentious issue we're dealing with at the moment. So I'm trying to help them sort it out in a way, and give them my view of the world, which they're quite interested in. So look, if that's the case, I don't think there's any reason in prolonging this workshop. Everybody's happy, and that's the position. So if staff can go away and do what they have to do to roll it, and that, so be it. All right. I don't think those are the only 2 topics we had for the workshop this morning. Councillor here.
Just a comment, actually, more so for democracy. I note that chat has been disabled, and I know how obviously that is information that is discoverable, but sometimes that's really beneficial. If we're having internet issues or we can't hear anyone in their presentation, it's really helpful to be able to have that chat facility so we can see if it's a problem holistically. So can we enable chat again?
Yeah, we can enable chat. It was just we had some complaints from some chairs about it being distracting while they're having meetings.
Chat is off the line. I'm sorry, people. As a chair sitting here, it is the most disruptive thing to a chair there is available. So I've made it pretty clear to democracy that if we're having meetings on that sort of thing, the chat thing is turned off. Sorry, you wouldn't do it in the chamber, so you shouldn't do it here. So it's same rule applies.
So is there another method if the presenter is unable to be heard because of poor internet? How do we raise that issue?
Well, I
just interrupt them.
To what Tony was saying, and I think his slides sort of spoke for themselves too. But I just don't want chat operating. I'm sorry, it's disruptive. Most forums I'm on and through Merrill stuff, we've all turned them off because if you're chairing a meeting, it's incredibly disruptive. And you don't talk in a chamber, so you shouldn't talk across other people in here. And I saw some poor behaviour of that by some people within this council recently, where people were in a meeting talking across one another and the chat thing was on. So it stays off. Sorry. Jim, you got an ear up there.
Yeah, I saw that you can raise your hand, but you can also put an ear up there. And maybe if you put an ear up, people will that's saying, hey, I can't hear. It's an idea.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Trouble is, I didn't want to interrupt Tony because I don't think Tony would have heard me. He had his ear too far out on. Sorry, Tony. All right, everybody. Thank you.